"Ma'am, you're trespassing, and if you don't step off this property immediately, I'll be forced to call the police," Karen barked, her phone already up. Face flushed with fury, I stood still on the front porch of my lakeside cabin barefoot, holding a mug of coffee, wearing an old flannel and a pair of worn jeans. The morning sun danced across the lake behind me, birds chirped cheerfully in the trees. To me, it was just another quiet morning, but for Karen, apparently, it was anything but. "You're not listening?" she snapped again. "This property falls under the HOA. You can't be here without written permission." I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. I took a slow sip and looked at her like she'd wandered onto the wrong stage. That's when she made the call. "I'm reporting a man refusing to vacate a cabin on Lakeshore Drive," she told the 911 dispatcher, her tone theatrical. "He says he owns the place, but there's no record. He's acting aggressive." Yes, I'm concerned for my safety. That part made me chuckle. I hadn't moved a muscle or said a single word since she arrived, but there she was, painting me as some dangerous drifter. What Karen didn't know was she wasn't dealing with a trespasser. She was about to find out. She was challenging the man who owned the entire town she lived in. And soon enough, the truth would start to unfold. But before we get to that part, let's rewind a bit. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. By the way, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You're going to want to buckle in for this ride. It all began about 3 months ago when I returned to Lakeshore. My name's David Carter, 58 years old. I grew up in a small Texas town, raised by a single mother who ran a lakeside diner until the day she passed. After leaving for the city, I worked my way up past starting in construction and eventually breaking into real estate development. I built a name for myself. People knew the suits, the cars, the magazine features. But what they didn't know, I missed the frogs at night. I missed the fireflies. I missed peace and quiet. So, after nearly 3 decades of building cities, I decided to buy one. The place was called Haven Hill, a little lakeside town nestled between rolling hills and thick forest, built around a wide freshwater lake. It had a crumbling HOA, a retired mayor, a couple of churches, a small school, and one road that looped around the whole community. It was quaint. It was fading, and I saw something worth saving. I quietly purchased 87% of the land, everything from the lakeshore cabins and the rundown mill to some of the town's neglected public buildings. The council was already on the verge of dissolving. Most residents were leaving. The HOA was falling apart from corruption and lack of leadership. So, I stepped in silently, through shell company ESA, and got to work. I wasn't looking to reinvent the town. I just wanted to restore what was there, fix broken plumbing, repair the cabins. I donated quietly, set up scholarships at the school, helped rebuild the tiny library. I didn't want recognition. I wanted solitude. That's why I chose Cabin 3 as the same one my mother used to bring me to as a boy. The old porch still creaked, and the oak tree still stretched tall behind it. I added solar power and updated the pipes, but otherwise, I left it untouched. Everything was calm, a broken bar, until Karen arrived. Karen Walker moved in from California and declared she was going to bring order to Haven Hill. Within a week of buying her house, she ran for HOA presidenta and won. Mostly because no one else wanted the job. She came armed with a clipboard, a megaphone, and an unhealthy obsession with other people's business. The first time she knocked on my door, she was holding an HOA rulebook. "You don't have any curtains," she said sternly. "That's right," I answered, sipping my tea. "Well, that's a violation of HOA privacy policy," she snapped. "I own this property," I replied calmly. "And the HOA, I own the land your HOA was built on, Karen," I said evenly. "Have a pleasant day." She didn't take that well, at all. What followed was a full-blown campaign of petty harassment. Letters taped to my door, citations claiming my deck was too close to the lake, accusations that my dog, Lucky, a rescue golden retriever who barely made a sound, was not HOA approved. She even held meetings to pass new rules clearly aimed at inconveniencing me. But I didn't react. I grew up watching my mother smile at people who treated her terribly. She'd always say, "They're hurting, baby. You don't fight fire with fire, you wait." So I waited, until this morning. I got up early, brewed my coffee, took Lucky down to the dock where he chased dragonflies and rolled through the dew-wet grass. The lake sparkled quietly. And that's when Karen marched up the path, shouting into her phone and unaware she was about to learn the hard way just who she'd picked a fight with. The lake shimmered like a glass, calm and still, until I spotted here a Karina parked just outside my property line in a golf cart, clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched high on her nose, flanked by 2 HOA board members. I paid them no attention. Then she marched down the path and smacked her hand against the railing of my porch. "This ends now," she snapped. "We've received numerous complaints. You're occupying this property unlawfully. I've spoken with the board. You must vacate this cabin immediately or we'll be forced to call the authorities." I blinked. "Feel free. You're not taking this seriously," she growled. "Oh, I am," I said, calm as ever. "You're the one wasting everyone's time." And just like that, she pulled out her phone and called 911. Right where all this started, the real question was, what would she do when law enforcement showed up? Because I happened to know one of the officers pretty well. I had even helped fund their new training facility the year prior. But Karen had no clue. Not yet. The peaceful silence of the morning began to fracture as the distant wail of sirens crept through the trees like a coming storm. Karen, convinced she held all the power, squared her shoulders with self-importance. One hand on her hip, the other gripping her clipboard like it held the U.S. Constitution. Behind her, the 2 HOA board members Adana and Chirila stood quietly. From the unease in their eyes, I could tell they weren't so sure about any of this. "This could have gone differently," Karen muttered without looking at me. "I tried to handle this respectfully, gave you a chance to walk away." I didn't respond, just leaned back in my chair as Lucky sat obediently by my feet, still as a statue. Moments later, the sheriff's SUV rolled down the gravel road and stopped in front of the cabin, sending a soft cloud of dust over Karen's golf cart. Out stepped Officer Travis Malini, tall, clean-cut, dark-haired, and as Texas-born as they come, one of the most genuine, dependable people I'd had the pleasure of meeting. We first crossed paths during the early phases of Haven Hill's renewal. Back then, he was struggling to raise funds for his team's safety gear. No one else stepped up, so I quietly did, writing a check through one of my companies without fanfare. He never forgot. As soon as his boots hit the ground, I saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He glanced from Karen to me and smiled. "Well, I'll be," he said, lifting his sunglasses. "Mr. Carter." "Morning, Officer Malone," I replied, cool and steady. Karen's eyes widened. "You know this man?" she asked, suspicion rising in her voice. "Of course I do," Travis said, stepping right past her. "David Carter's the reason we have working radios and fully equipped patrol vehicles." Now it was Dawn and Cheryl's turn to look stunned. Karen, clearly blindsided, didn't like being out of the loop. "I don't care who he donated to," she snapped. "He's squatting here without permission. This cabin is under HOA control. He's refused every warning, ignored citations, and hasn't paid a single fine. He doesn't have the right to be here." Travis turned to me. "David, is that accurate?" I gave a slight grin. "Would you like to see the ownership documents?" Before he could respond, Karen jumped in. "That won't be necessary. We've reviewed the home maps. This property isn't his." Without a word, I reached beside the swing, pulled out a manila folder, and handed it over. Inside were official papers, certified copies of the city charter, land registry filings, and the updated deed transfers. Travis opened it, scanned the first page, and raised his eyebrows. He turned to Karen. "This document shows David owns the entire Lakeside District, including your subdivision." Karen's jaw nearly hit the ground. "That can't be right. He's bluffing." "It's fake," she stammered. "I demand you verify this with City Hall." "I would," Travis replied, "if it wasn't already notarized and recorded by the county clerk 3 months ago. His name's on every parcel west of Haven Road. That includes this cabin, the lakefront, and, yes, even your cul-de-sac." Silence fell. Absolute silence. The only sound was the soft lap of lake water and a single confused bird calling from the trees. Karen looked like someone had slapped her with a gospel. Her face turned pale, lips trembled. "You're lying," she finally whispered. Travis shut the folder and handed it back to me. "No, ma'am, he's not." I rose from my chair slowly. I purchased the land through a trust, I said evenly. Didn't want attention, just wanted a little peace and quiet. I paused for a beat, but peace doesn't mean I'll let someone walk over me. Karen's composure began to crumble, her shoulders drooped, her voice faltered. Yeah, I didn't know. If someone had just explained it, I tried, I said gently. From day one, you chose not to listen. Don't, Cheryl whispered, tugging lightly on Karen's arm. I told you to leave him alone. Don simply shook his head and muttered, this is going to be a disaster at the next meeting. But I wasn't angry. If anything, I felt a deep sadness, sad that someone could be so consumed by control and status that they'd rather intimidate strangers than take a moment to know them. Karen, once puffed up with certainty, now looked like a balloon slowly deflating. I didn't mean to cause problems, she mumbled. I just thought you were another squatter sneaking in. You see people as problems before you even speak to them, I said quietly. That's the real issue. Travis cleared his throat. Well, since there's clearly no crime being committed, I'll be heading out unless you want to press harassment charges. I shook my head. Not today. He nodded respectfully. You know where to find me if the changes. As his vehicle disappeared down the dirt path, Karen stood there, eyes flickering between embarrassment and confusion. She didn't apologize. She didn't say another word. She just turned, climbed into her golf cart, and drove off much slower, much quieter. Cheryl and Don offered half-hearted goodbyes, avoiding my gaze, then followed her out. It felt like it was over, but I was wrong. The very next morning, I found a notice nailed to the side of my cabin. The headline, in bold capital letters, read, Emergency HOA vote, motion to declare lakeside area under revised authority. Below that, in aggressive font, owner must attend compulsory meeting or face legal action. I stared at the paper, my hand curling into a fist. Karen wasn't backing down. She was doubling down this time, targeting everything I owned along the lake. She didn't realize the kind of fight she'd just picked. Not yet, but she would. I stood on the porch, the wind tugging at the paper as it flapped against the wood like a taunt. Emergency vote, legal threat, revised authority. The wording dripped with Karen's desperation for dominance. Lucky nudged my leg gently, sensing the tension in the air. I reached down to scratch behind his ears and looked out across the lake. The sky was still glowing pink from the morning light. Wisps of mist floated like spirits over the surface of the water. Everything around me was still, peaceful except the people trying to ruin it. Karen didn't just want order, she wanted absolute control. And now she was coming for every inch of the lakeside, determined to mold it into her little HOA empire. That afternoon, I took a walk into town. Haven Hill was tiny. Blink and you'd miss Main Street, but it had charm. Miss June's Bakery still had the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls pouring from its door. The old barber shop, run by Erla, an 80-year-old veterana, echoed with war stories and gentle scissor snips. And at the heart of it all stood the aging town hall, now mostly used for home meetings and petty arguments about lawn decor. That's where I was headed. I stepped through the glass doors and into a room filled with metal folding chairs, stale coffee, and a quiet buzz of gossip. It felt less like a community meeting and more like a courtroom awaiting a verdict. At the front, standing tall and smug behind a flimsy plastic table, was Karen. She spotted me and beamed with artificial warmth. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she announced, loud enough for the whole room. "How wonderful of you to join us. Please, find a seat." I gave a nod but stayed near the back, not moving an inch toward the rows of chairs. The meeting began with the usual protocol: a roll call, old business, and an overly dramatic rant about noisy ducks. Then Karen cleared her throat with theatrical importance. "Now," she said, "let's get to the real matter, the lakeside cabin situation." All eyes turned to me. Karen continued, "As many of you know, we've had an individual occupying a lakeside cabin who refuses to comply with HOA regulations. We've sent notices, issued fines, and attempted civil discussion, but he remains defiant. It's time to take action." A hand went up. Mr. Watson, an old trucker who rarely said much, cleared his throat. "Didn't you say he owns the land, Karen? If that's true, there's not much we can do, right?" Karen's smile tightened like a rubber band. "Not quite," she replied. "While Mr. Carter may have acquired property adjacent to the HOA's boundaries, that doesn't excuse him from community standards. In fact, our governing documents allow for jurisdictional expansions when a new landowner's actions impact the broader community. She paused, letting that sink in. That's why I'm proposing a vote out to formally extend HOA oversight to include the entire lakeside area. A low ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Some faces showed confusion, others looked tired, like they'd heard this story before. Karen went on, voice rising in conviction. This is about consistency. About safety. About maintaining the value of our homes. If we allow one person to live outside the rules, what happens next? Bonfires, boat parties, chickens on porches? Karen quipped sarcastically. That last one earned a few chuckles from the crowd. I raised my hand. Karen hesitated for a moment, then gave a reluctant nod. Mr. Carter? I walked slowly to the front of the room, the worn wooden floor creaking beneath my boots. As I looked around, I saw faces as some familiar, others notable, but many belonged to people whose lives I'd quietly touched. The school I'd helped fund, the park bench I repaired, the storm drains I paid to replace without ever asking for credit. I cleared my throat. My name is David Carter. Some of you know me. Some of you think you do. I didn't come back here looking for a fight. I came back to live in peace, a broken bar in a place that's meant something to me since childhood. I paused and held up the documents. I legally own the land surrounding the lake, completely and without dispute. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over it unless I choose to opt in. I haven't. And no vote can give you power over land that doesn't belong to you. That's not how property law works. Karen rolled her eyes. We can designate it a protective zone. I met her stare and replied firmly, no, you can't. You can name it whatever you like. But what you're actually doing is trying to take away someone's rights just because you don't like being told no. That's not community. That's control. A few people clapped. Karen's face reddened. We'll move forward with the vote, she said sharply. All in favor of expanding HOA authority to cover the lakeside property as a broken bar say aye. A few hands went up, 3 at first, then 5. A couple more followed, but most people stayed still. Some shook their heads. I even heard one woman mutter under her breath, "This is insane." I raised my voice. And all opposed? A louder wave of voices, more hands. Even Cheryl and Dawn, after a brief glance at each other, voted number. Karen stood frozen, her plan crumbling right in front of her. She forced a tight smile. Very well, it seems the motion does not pass. I nodded politely. Thank you, but I wasn't finished. Not quite. As I turned to leave, the back doors creaked open and a man in a pressed suit stepped into the room, briefcase in one hand, expression unreadable. Mr. Carter? He said. I stopped. That's me. He opened the case and handed over a folder. You've been served. Karen's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. I opened it. Inside was an official notice of legal review. Karen had submitted a formal complaint to the county zoning board. She was accusing me of running an unlicensed lakeside business and disrupting residential harmony using vague legal language designed to spark a full investigation. I glanced up at her. Is this really the road you want to go down? She gave a smug little smile. If you won't follow our rule as a broken bar, we'll rewrite them. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. But inside, I felt a shift. This wasn't a game anymore. Karen had declared war. What she didn't realize was that her HOA wasn't just running out of authority, it was running out of cash. And I didn't just own a cabin or the lake. I owned the future of this town. When I stepped out of the meeting hall, the hot summer air hit me like a blast furnace. But it wasn't the sun that made me sweat, it was the notice still clutched in my hand. Official, county stamped. Karen had made her move. And it was aggressive. She accused me of everything from operating a commercial business out of my home to a believe it or not illegally storing aquatic vehicles. I had one canoe, that was it. Lucky padded beside me, tongue out, tail wagging, completely unaware that our peaceful little corner of the world was now at the center of a full-blown legal battle. As I neared the edge of Main Street, I spotted someone sitting outside the bakery. An older woman with silver curls and comically oversized glasses. Miss June. She looked up from her newspaper and waved me over. David Carter, she said, folding the paper with care. Heard about the meeting already? I chuckled. Word travels fast in Haven Hill. In this town, she smiled, it travels faster than common sense. She patted the bench next to her, and I sat. I just don't understand. I sighed. I came back to quietly restore this place. Now I've got lawsuits chasing me like I'm running a nightclub out of my kitchen. Miss June gave a knowing smile. She's afraid of you, Karen? I asked, raising an eyebrow. She nodded. People don't always show fear by backing away. Sometimes they dig in deeper, try to grab hold of anything they can still control or because they feel everything else slipping away. I thought about that. About the way Karen clung to her clipboard like it was a lifeline, the way she used rules like armor, her rigid voice, her obsession with authority. It all made a bit more sense. But understanding her didn't mean I'd let her drag me into a courtroom over lies and technicalities. Which is why, that night, I made a phone call, not just to any attorney, to Martha Jameson, former real estate prosecutor. Martha Jameson wasn't just any lawyer, she was a former real estate prosecutor turned private powerhouse. She once dismantled an entire rogue HOA in a wealthy Austin suburb, and now she worked selectively, carefully, and ruthlessly. When I called her that evening and explained the situation, she didn't even hesitate. "This woman's playing with fire," Martha said over the phone. "Want me to put it out?" "Not yet," I answered, sipping my tea while watching the moonlight shimmer across the lake. "I want to give her one last chance to do the right thing." "And if she doesn't?" Martha asked. I didn't answer right away, just stared into the darkness, then said, "Then she'll learn the hard way." The very next morning, a county inspector showed up unannounced. He wore a hard hat, carried a clipboard, and had the polite but cautious manner of someone sent to investigate. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I'm here on behalf of the zoning board. We received a report about possible unauthorized commercial use of this property." I welcomed him inside without hesitation, walked him through the cabin, explained that I lived completely off-grid and no rentals, no events, no business, just solar panels, peace, and a rescue dog, Lucky, ever the charming host, even got a belly rub. After about an hour, the inspector thanked me for my time and left. By that evening, I received an email that read simply, "Your property is in full compliance, no further action required." The complaint had been deemed baseless, but that wasn't the real surprise. 3 hours later, I logged into the HOA's financial dashboard. Yes, I had access, because what Karen didn't realize was that the original HOA president, Mr. Franklin, had quietly stepped down a while back and sold his shares in the HOA's funding trust to Broken Bar directly to me. That gave me partial oversight of the HOA's operating account. And what I found, it stopped me cold. Karen had spent $8,476 of HOA funds on legal consultation without board approval. She'd also authorized a $3,200 community development fee to a landscaping company that didn't exist. That money? It went straight to a bank account under her cousin's name. I sat there for a moment in stunned silence. This wasn't just a power trip anymore. This was fraud, and I knew exactly what had to happen. I sent an anonymous tip to the town ethics committee, along with a formal request for an emergency audit. Then I waited, and I didn't have to wait long. Friday morning, I was sitting out on the dock with Lucky, sipping my coffee as usual, when I heard footsteps and a knock on the front gate. Karen stood there, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, but this time, they weren't here for me. Her face was flushed not with pride or fury, but with panic. One of the officers stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, sorry to interrupt. We're actually here for Miss Walker. The town's ethics committee has launched an inquiry. We've been instructed to escort her to City Hall for questioning." Karen spun around in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding. I'm the one who filed the complaints." "He's the problem, not me." I stood slowly, calm and measured. "I warned you," I said. "You should have listened." She glared at me, eyes wild with fury. "You did this." "I know it was you." "I didn't have to," I replied. "You left a trail anyone could follow." The officers began to guide her away as she kept protesting, blaming everyone but herself. Her voice faded behind the trees as they disappeared up the hill. For a moment, I let myself believe the storm had passed, that maybe finally a peace could return to the lake. But I was wrong. Just as I sat back down on the porch, my phone buzzed. It was Martha. "You're going to want to hear this," she said. I sighed. "Now what?" "I've been digging," she continued. "Karen isn't just the HOA president. She filed a purchase offer on the lot next to your cabin last week. But she did it through her cousin's name. I froze. She's trying to box me in, I said. Exactly, Martha replied. The deal's already in escrow. She was planning to build a community center right beside you. I looked out across the calm water, fist clenched. She's trying to drive me out, I muttered. She's not just plain dirty anymore, Martha said. She's trying to cut off your access to your trails, your utilities, even your dock. You ready to fight back for real now? I didn't answer right away. I just stared at the lake. The sun was beginning to dip low over Haven Hill, casting streaks of gold across the water's surface. But inside me, there was no peace, only purpose. Martha's words echoed. She filed an offer in her cousin's name. If that land sale went through, she'd control the very trail I used every day, where I walked lucky, where I hauled in fishing gear, where I accessed my solar shed. That narrow stretch of dirt connected everything. And she nearly took it from me without my even knowing. The only reason we caught it in time was because Martha ran a deeper audit after the ethics complaint. If she hadn't, Karen would have already built a fence and claimed the land as private HOA space. I wouldn't even have known until it was too late. I couldn't let that happen. So, I made a decision. No more quiet. No more watching from the sidelines. It was time for everyone in Haven Hill to know exactly who I was and what was really going on. That night, I drafted a letter, printed it, folded it, sealed over 100 envelopes. Before sunrise the next morning, I personally delivered them to every home on every home-managed street. By noon, the entire town was buzzing. People stopped me in the street. Some of the responses came in quickly. Some neighbors were shocked. Others approached me with quiet apologies. Many expressed their support. Most of them had no idea I owned more than 70% of the land around the lake. They didn't know I'd been the one fixing the school roof after a storm, repaving the roads, sponsoring scholarships, or quietly cleaning up fallen trees after bad weather. To them, I was just the guy living alone in a cabin. And that's exactly what Karen wanted them to believe. But now, the truth was out. That evening, a special home meeting was called, the largest in Haven Hill's history. Every seat in the old town hall was filled. People stood against the walls, talking in hushed tones. The air buzzed with tension and anticipation. Karen hadn't arrived yet, but her cousin Rick sat near the back, nervously tugging at his too small suit collar. Cheryl, one of the few board members left with an ounce of integrity, stepped up to the front and cleared her throat. "We've all read the letter," she began. "Mr. Carter has contributed to this town in more ways than we ever knew, and while he's been quietly helping, our whole leadership has spent the last 3 months targeting him, filing complaints, issuing threats, wasting resources." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cheryl continued, her voice steady. "We've now confirmed that Ms. Walker filed a purchase offer on protected land next to Mr. Carter's property, using HOA funds disguised as development fees. That's not just unethical. It may be criminal." A hand shot up from the crowd at Earl the barber. "I say we vote to remove her," he declared. Applause erupted. Cheryl nodded solemnly. "We'll proceed. But she deserves the right to respond." That's when the double doors slammed open. Karen strutted in, wearing a bright red suit and high heels, clipboard in hand as if she still ran the show. She walked to the front of the room like she owned it, her gaze unwavering despite the sea of glaring eyes. "I see the wolves are circling," she said coldly. "But before you hang me out to dry, ask yourself, Essa, what did I actually do wrong? Wanting structure, clean streets, order? I was the one keeping this community from falling apart." A voice from the crowd cut through her speech. "You went after the wrong person." Karen's eyes locked on mine. "And as for Mr. Carter," she sneered, "if anyone here truly believes a man living alone in a cabin should hold more influence than this entire board, maybe you all deserve what's coming." I rose slowly and stepped forward. My voice was calm. "I didn't come here to control Haven Hill. I came back to restore Ita quietly, respectfully." But every time I extended an olive branch, Karen came back swinging. The room fell silent. I turned to face everyone. "You've seen what she's done, and you know what I've done. I'm not here to sway your vote, but you deserve to understand what's at stake. If she completes this land deal, she'll lock off lake access for every single family here. She'll fence it, brand it as a preservation zone, and fine your kids the second they wander off the trail. Gasps rose from the audience. "Don't give her that kind of control," I said. "Not again." The vote was swift. One by one, hands lifted into the air, dozens of them. The final count, 86-4. Karen stood stiffly, like a frozen statue. "You can't do this," she hissed. "I built this HOA. I gave it structure. You need me." "No," Cheryl replied. "What we need is peace." Karen turned and stormed out, slamming the doors behind her. Her cousin Rick slipped out a side exit, not saying a word. I wanted to believe it was over, but the very next morning, my phone rang. It was the escrow office. "Mr. Carter," the woman said, hesitantly, "we're so sorry to inform you the lot beside your cabin has just been paid in full." The buyer bypassed the flagged account and processed the deed transfer overnight. The land is now officially owned by Rick Walker. I stared at the phone, heart sinking. She beat us to it. She got the land, and with Ida control of the trail. And she didn't wait. That same afternoon, a cement truck arrived at the Lakeside Trail's entrance. Karen stepped out, wearing a hard hat and carrying blueprints. Her red power suit was gone, replaced by jeans and a branded polo that read, "Haven Hill Lakeside Initiative." She wasn't just making a movie, she was launching a full-scale project, something big, something bold. And now that she'd lost her title, she had nothing to hold her back. The roar of the cement mixer rumbled like thunder across the lake. I stood at the trail's edge, fists clenched, watching her bark instructions to a small crew. The real storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. A fresh banner now stretched across the temporary fencing, bold white letters on blue. "Coming soon, HOA Lakeside Community Center." It was a complete fabrication. Karen had no authority, no HOA backing, no permits, no public approval. But because she'd slipped the land purchase through using her cousin's name, she now legally owned the trailhead LOTA, and she was using it like a wedge to sever the community from the lake. Once that building went up, access would be gone. No more kids fishing off the bank. No elderly couples walking their dogs at sunset. No more golden hour views from my porch. My cabin, and the lives of every neighbor nearby, would be boxed in like a prison cell. That's when it hit me, not frustration, not irritation, rage. Pure, cold, blinding rage. This wasn't about bylaws or community codes anymore. This was retaliation, a wounded ego flailing to destroy everything it could no longer control. Lucky growled low at my side. I placed a steady hand on his back. "I know, boy, we're not letting this happen." I walked straight back to the cabin and made 2 calls, the first to Martha, the second to Governor Fletcher himself. See, Karen never asked who I really was. She never cared. To her, I was just some reclusive guy with a fancy cabin. But in truth, I sat on the executive board of one of the largest environmental land trusts in the state of Texas. Our mission? Protecting watersheds, safeguarding public trails, and enforcing conservation laws, especially around marshland ecosystems. And that little slice of land Karen had just bulldozed, it happened to fall under a protected ecological jurisdiction thanks to a wetland zone detailed in a 1987 survey report most people had long forgotten. I hadn't. 2 days later, Haven Hill got a surprise visit from the Texas Department of Environmental Quality. 4 official trucks, hazmat suits, 1 soil expert, and a man named Bill Rogers, a veteran of 30 years in environmental law. I met them at the trail as Karen's construction crew had just started cutting foundations. Bill stepped out, clipboard in hand. "You David Carter?" I nodded. He glanced toward the workers, then pointed. "Shut it down." Karen spun on her heel. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the shock. "Excuse me?" she barked. Bill didn't blink. "You're in violation of State Code 62.14a, he said, deadpan. "You disrupted protected soil within 150 feet of registered marshland. No soil reports. No preservation request. This lot is under ecological review by the Land Trust of Texas." Karen scoffed. "I own this land. I have the deed." Bill smiled faintly. "Congratulations, you bought land you can't legally build on." The construction crew hesitated. Karen turned to them, desperate. "Keep digging." But one of the men backed away, eyes on the state officials now filming everything. "Ma'am, I think we're gonna step away for now." And just like that, they packed up and drove off, leaving her standing in the dust and silence. Karen stormed toward me, shaking, This is you. You did this. No, I said, voice calm as stone. You did. You could have let it go, walked away with dignity, but instead, you tried to punish the whole town because you lost your throne. She stared at me like she wanted to scream. You tried to buy power. You tried to wall off joy, but you forgot the oldest truth in the book, I said. Her voice cracked. What truth? I looked her dead in the eye. You don't own peace. You either live in it or you destroy yourself trying to take it from others. That night, as state officials taped off the lot with violation, do not enter signs and posted an official stop order on the half-built foundation, I sat by the lake again, lucky at my feet. The trees rustled in the wind, and the water shimmered like peace itself. For a moment, I believed it might finally be over, but Haven Hill had one last card to play. The next morning, the town woke up to a headline that stunned everyone. Karen Walker had sued the entire HOA. That's right, as she filed a formal lawsuit claiming wrongful removal, character defamation, and emotional distress due to the public vote. And she wasn't just crying victim, she was demanding $250,000 in damages. Karen wasn't just demanding $250,000 in damages, she was also petitioning the court to dissolve the HOA entirely. And the real kicker, she filed it in federal court. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about land or bylaws or who sat at the head of a folding table on meeting nights. It was about all of USA, the town, the lake, the families, the friendships, everything. Karen had gone nuclear, and we were all caught in the fallout. The town of Haven Hill had never seen anything like it. The lawsuit landed like a bomb. Within 24 hours, people were whispering in church pews and arguing in coffee lines. Copies of the court filing spread faster than gossip after prom night. Even Miss June had one pinned on her bakery corkboard like a wanted poster. Plaintiff, Karen Walker. Defendants, the Haven Hill HOA Board, current and former, unnamed manipulators. Claims, defamation, emotional trauma, wrongful removal, request, full HOA dissolution due to systemic corruption and community bullying. I nearly laughed at the irony, Karina calling us corrupt. But none of it was funny. She wasn't just trying to claw her way back to power. She wanted to light the whole house on fire and watch it burn with all of us inside. Martha flew into town that weekend. When she stepped off the train platform, navy blazer sharp, sunglasses on, heels clicking like a metronome of justice, she didn't waste a second. David, she said, adjusting her watch, we're done playing nice. By that afternoon, she called an emergency meeting with Cheryl, Dawn, Miss June, and even Earl from the barbershop. Together, we formed an official legal defense council for the HOA. While Martha tackled the legal side, emotions, counters, filings, I focused on the people, because Karen's strategy wasn't just legal, it was psychological. She wanted fear, she wanted confusion, she wanted neighbors to turn on each other until the whole thing collapsed under its own doubt. So I walked, from porch to porch, house to house. I answered questions. I showed real documents, deeds, receipts, public filings. I reminded them what community meant, how far we'd come, what peace had looked like before Karen started swinging her clipboard like a sword. Slowly, the fog began to lift. Even some of her old supporters began to admit what we all knew deep down. The fines, the threats, the shouting. It had never been about rulesa, it had always been about control. But courts don't care about drama, they care about facts. So Martha compiled them. She built a binder thick as a brick, documented financial misconduct under Karen's leadership, misappropriated funds, testimonies from unpaid workers, the fake landscaping company linked to her cousin, the fraudulent land transfer, HOA bylaw violations, illegal construction activity, photos of the half-finished site, now rusting behind fencing, full of debris. And then, the day came. The hearing was held 2 towns over, at the county courthouse. Big room, fluorescent lights, a judge with silver hair and a gaze like steel. He looked like he'd seen every kind of nonsense imaginably and had no patience for any of it. Karen, in true Karen fashion, chose to represent herself. She walked in with a folder labeled Justice and a pearl necklace so bright it looked like it had its own spotlight. Her outfit practically screamed, "I'm the victim here." The judge gave her 20 minutes to make her case. She took 40. And in those 40 minutes, she blamed everyone: the board, the HOA, the residents, me, the mailman, even the lady at the gas station who, she claimed, gave her a dirty look on the day of the vote. She cried, she shouted, she pounded the table. At one point, she even accused Martha of being part of a corporate land acquisition conspiracy. The judge rubbed his forehead like he was trying to hold in a migraine. The judge looked like he had a headache the size of Texas. Then it was our turn. Martha stood like a statue carved from confidence. Calm, controlled. Your Honor, she began, voice steady. This is not a defamation case. This is a tantrum, a desperate reaction to a loss of control, fueled by personal vengeance. She stepped forward, opened the binder, and laid out the truth one page at a time. Here's the financial fraud, she said, passing the judge a packet. Here's the mismanagement, the fake landscaping invoices, the wire transfers to an account under Rick Walker's name, Karen's cousin. Page after page landed on the bench like falling dominoes. And finally, Martha said, holding up a printed email, this. She walked it to the judge herself, an email Karen had sent 3 months earlier. If they won't follow me, I'll make sure they lose everything. The courtroom went still. The judge read it, glanced at Karen, then turned back to us, and with 5 quiet words, he ended it all. This case is hereby dismissed. Karen let out a sharp gasp, but the judge wasn't finished. In addition, he said, due to substantial evidence of financial misconduct, I am ordering a formal investigation into Miss Walker's actions during her tenure as HOA president. I recommend the town pursue restitution and any applicable civil penalties. Karen didn't respond. No outbursts, no clipboard, just silence. We'd won, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release, not revenge. Just peace. Outside the courthouse, neighbors embraced. Some cried, some laughed. Even Rika, Karen's cousin, approached me slowly, hat in hand. I didn't know how far she'd take it. He said quietly, I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. I looked him in the eyes. Do better, I replied. And he nodded. Back in Haven Hill, the HOA rebuilt this time the right way. Meetings became open forums. Transparency became policy. Decisions included everyone, not just the loudest voices. The trail was restored, the fencing removed, and with Martha's help and my colleagues from the Land Trust, the trailhead was declared permanently protected under the Texas Environmental Preservation Act. As for my cabin, it became a place for the town. Every Saturday in summer, I opened the doors. Kids came to fish off the dock. Seniors sat in folding chairs, watching the water glisten. Lucky, he became a local legend. We even renamed the trail Carter's Path to Peace. Karen left town quietly a week after the hearing. No speeches, no rants, just gone. And maybe that was for the best, because sometimes the loudest people need silence to hear their own echo. I came to Haven Hill looking for quiet, and now finally I had it. Not because I ran, not because I fought to destroy, but because I stood my ground, with patience, with truth, with kindness. And in the end, when you do that, you don't just win. You build something that lasts.